Today, DEA and FBI storm Los Angeles taxi empire. 8.2 tons, 500 vehicles, and $480 million seized.
At 4:47 in the morning, the order went out across Los Angeles. Not to traffic control. Not to airport security. To federal command. In the next 14 minutes, 8 dispatch centers would go silent. More than 500 vehicles would be stopped simultaneously. And 8.2 tons of narcotics would vanish from the streets forever. This is the story of the largest transportation-based narcotics operation ever dismantled on American soil. A cartel infrastructure so perfectly hidden that it moved thousands of kilos of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine through the city every single week using the one vehicle every police officer ignores: the taxi. For 3 years, the Vasquez cartel, a criminal organization operating across the Southwest, had built something unprecedented. Not a warehouse operation. Not a street-level network. A distributed logistics system that turned 500 yellow cabs into a moving narcotics empire. 8.2 tons seized. $480 million frozen. And the most shocking discovery of all: not one shot fired, not one officer killed, but the entire infrastructure understood, mapped, and destroyed in a single coordinated strike that would reshape how law enforcement hunts criminal networks forever. The investigation began not with a tip, not with a bust. It began with math. DEA analysts in the Los Angeles field office were tracking cocaine and fentanyl flows into Southern California. For months, they had noticed a pattern that should have been impossible. Massive quantities of drugs, we are talking multiple tons per week, were reaching distribution points throughout the region with almost no detectable transport trail. No freight records. No rental vehicle registrations. No rideshare data. No truck stops. No highway surveillance hits. Yet the timing was flawless. Deliveries arrived on schedule. Quantities matched orders. Quality remained consistent. Someone had figured out how to move narcotics across an entire metropolitan area without triggering any of the traditional red flags that law enforcement used to detect trafficking. DEA Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Holden and his team began running overlays. They layered delivery windows with city transit patterns, traffic flow data, airport operations, and neighborhood foot traffic. One thing kept appearing in every single analysis: taxi activity, shift changes at late hours, early morning airport runs, extended fares that never showed up in GPS logs, taxis parked outside luxury hotels at odd times, taxis that logged incredible mileage but had no matching passenger records. At first, Holden thought he was seeing ghosts. Pattern recognition software sometimes finds correlations that don't mean anything. But when his team pulled actual taxi company records and compared them to known distribution hubs, the picture became impossible to ignore. Someone wasn't just using taxis. They had infiltrated an entire fleet and turned it into a narcotics pipeline. The investigation escalated. Undercover DEA agents began riding taxis. Hundreds of trips. Different drivers. Different neighborhoods. They tracked routes with precision GPS units. They monitored payment behavior. They recorded dispatcher communications. What emerged was not chaos. It was discipline. Drivers checking in on coded radio calls. Dispatchers using language that had nothing to do with passenger requests. Hold the trunk. Take the quiet route. Switch cars. Rotate out at mile marker 45. The communication was military style, compartmentalized, and consistent. Wiretaps were authorized. What federal agents heard was chilling in its efficiency. A dispatcher would receive an instruction. Within minutes, 3 taxis would position themselves at specific locations. A driver would report ready. Another would acknowledge. An exchange would happen in seconds, a duffel bag from one vehicle to another, and the convoy would disperse back into traffic. No alarms, no suspicion, just normal city movement. By the time federal command had enough evidence to act, they weren't speculating. They had mapped the empire. They knew the dispatch centers. They knew the vehicle yards. They knew the mechanics who built the hidden compartments. They knew the financial controllers. And they knew exactly when to strike. At 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, FBI Assistant Director James Rivera convened an emergency command center at the federal building in downtown Los Angeles. Tactical teams were already staging. DEA units were positioned across the city. ICE agents were standing by. Naval support was on alert at San Pedro. The operation had a code name: Federal Razor. The objective was total disruption. Not a raid. A siege. At exactly 4:47 a.m., the order came down. Go. What happened in the next 90 minutes would be described by prosecutors as the most coordinated law enforcement operation ever conducted against a single criminal network operating within a single city. At the South Los Angeles Vehicle Yard on Figueroa Street, Tactical teams breached the gates while taxis were still parked in formation. Agents moved with silent precision, weapons low, badges visible, announcing federal authority. The yard supervisor tried to run. He made it 20 feet before agents tackled him against a concrete wall. Inside the main garage, what agents found made them understand exactly how sophisticated this operation was. Rows of taxis, hundreds of them, parked with military precision. But these weren't normal cabs. False floors had been welded into trunks. Reinforced compartments were hidden beneath back seats. RFID tracking tags were positioned behind door panels to coordinate movement without radio communication. Inside those compartments were bricks, vacuum sealed, stamped with cartel insignia, organized with the precision of inventory management software. Cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl pills. Enough narcotics in a single yard to supply distribution networks across the entire Southwest for weeks. By 5:28 a.m., the first preliminary seizure numbers came back to command. One yard, 1,200 kilos of cocaine. Another yard, 800 kilos of methamphetamine and synthetic opioids. A third, 900 kilos of fentanyl pills, each one capable of being pressed into counterfeit pharmaceuticals. As the sun rose and agents hit 4 more vehicle yards across the city, the numbers climbed. Long Beach, 1,600 kilos. Commerce, 1,400 kilos. Vernon, 950 kilos. By 6:45 a.m., before most of Los Angeles was awake, Federal Command had seized 8.2 tons of narcotics. More than 500 vehicles were impounded. Preliminary freeze orders had locked $480 million in accounts, property, and shell company assets. But the drugs were only part of it. What made this operation historic was what came next. At the East Los Angeles Dispatch Center, FBI agents found something that shifted the entire investigation. The servers. Rows of them. Not old equipment. State-of-the-art dispatch software that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement. The system tracked every taxi in real time. It routed vehicles using algorithms that predicted demand and position capacity with precision. But alongside the legitimate dispatch function was a second layer. A hidden network using the same infrastructure. A cartel-controlled routing system that moved drugs, not passengers. When cyberforensics teams cracked the encryption and mapped the architecture, they found something that made prosecutors go pale. This wasn't just a distribution network. This was a command structure. A parallel organization embedded inside a legitimate transportation company. And it had been running openly for 3 years without detection. By 6:15 a.m., the first arrests were happening. The operational controller, a man named Victor Reyes, was detained in a glass-walled office overlooking the dispatch floor. No struggle. No denial. He handed over the keys to a safe behind his desk without being asked. Inside were burner phones, prepaid debit cards, and a ledger. Not a ledger of maintenance schedules. A ledger of money. Payments to drivers. Bonuses for clean runs. Penalties for missed windows. The shorthand was consistent with wiretap evidence. This was the nerve center of the entire operation. At the same time, in Commerce, DEA teams discovered something equally damning. A mobile workshop. A converted trailer parked inside a vehicle yard with welders, hydraulic lifts, and dozens of partially dismantled taxi interiors. The hidden compartments weren't added randomly. They were standardized, engineered, mass-produced. This was industrial-scale narcotics smuggling disguised as transportation maintenance. Whoever built this operation had understood that scale requires process. Process requires engineering. And engineering requires documentation. By 7:30 a.m., arrests were cascading across the city. A yard supervisor taken into custody while trying to destroy a burner phone. A senior dispatcher detained at his home after attempting to flee through a back alley. A fleet accountant arrested with 3 laptops and $900,000 in cash stacked in duffel bags. By noon, 28 individuals were in federal custody. Not couriers. Not street-level dealers. Executives. Planners. Engineers. Financial controllers. The infrastructure of the empire. Inside the seized dispatch center, agents working with cyberforensics team found something that expanded the scope of the investigation exponentially. A routing matrix. Not just for Los Angeles. For the entire Southwest. The taxi network wasn't just moving drugs inside the city. It was feeding distribution hubs in Long Beach, San Bernardino, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Tucson. The Vasquez cartel had built a distributed network that could move thousands of kilos across state lines using transportation that blended perfectly into normal a charge that carried mandatory minimums of 20 years. Money laundering through transportation services, federal transportation fraud, asset concealment. Bail was denied across the board. Not even a discussion. Federal judges read the indictments and immediately comprehended the scope. These defendants weren't facing charges for moving drugs. They were facing charges for building an organized system designed to move drugs indefinitely. By 3 p.m. on the first day, bank accounts were freezing.
Believed that a single gunshot could bring down an entire underground empire that had existed.
Kingpin in Mexico, now facing 15-defendant federal indictment. Wiretaps, undercover operations, extensive surveillance, and swift enforcement action led to enormous seizures in this case.
Doors open, interiors exposed, the illusion of normalcy
existed for a full decade, right as
cities saw the compartments, once they saw the wells, once they saw the
heart of America.
DEA officials say they seized 733 pounds worth of the street drug. They claim this is the single largest meth bust in state history. The DEA says agents seized these drugs from a Lakewood home along with other equipment to make more meth. This all comes as part of a larger investigation.
By day 3, the case stopped being local. Federal prosecutors unsealed the indictments just after midnight.
The story with a warning bell from Fox News that from nose of the authorities.
Southern Texas shattered long before sunrise.
Not drivers, executives
Of a 37-year-old woman.
Financial
Unmarked
controllers,
SUVs,
fleet
armored
engineers,
vehicle,
cartel operatives embedded inside a legitimate transportation service.
ICE agent opened fire after a confrontation involving a vehicle.
their spotlights slicing across the
Others
darknet.
opened the door to life sentences. Within hours
To have revealed the real threat that this officer was
One
facing.
of the senior
And
dispatch
federal
coordinators
convoys
broke.
swarmed them.
Cooperation versus decades in federal prison was an easy
While the
calculation.
incident immediately
Provided
sparked
access
public
credentials,
scrutiny and
backup server
protest.
Massive
locations,
industrial
and a complete
warehouse
hierarchy of
outside
command.
Lorette.
growing
Names,
just
roles,
3.1%
pay
in the
structure.
same
He fired in
Everything.
self-defense.
What prosecutors learned
Investigators found
confirmed
a
their worst
financial
suspicions.
flowchart.
The
All
taxi
these
empire
cases,
wasn't
these
reacting
serious
to demand.
crimes
It
involving
was
children,
forecasting it.
when those
Using
entrusted with
historical ride
protecting
data,
the law
event
become
schedules,
accomplices to
airport traffic
crime,
projections,
Community
and weather
clinics reported
patterns, the
constant
network
staff
predicted where
shortages.
narcotics would be needed days in advance. Taxis were pre-positioned, compartments loaded, routes optimized to blend perfectly with passenger traffic and tourist patterns.
these
This wasn't
intolerable
street-level
acts of
crime.
abuse that
This
they have
was
allowed to
logistics
slip in
engineering
is rarely
applied
an
to narcotics
isolated
trafficking
individual
at
act.
continental
What
scale.
happened
By
next
the end of
would
the week,
become enforcement
9 additional
operations of the
arrests
year.
were made
Network,
outside California.
multi-state raids,
One
and
in
corruption
Nevada,
reaching
2
all the
in
way into
Arizona.
city
A
government
financial
to this scene.
facilitator detained
While
at
the
McCarran
entire city
Airport
was
in
sound
Las Vegas
asleep,
while attempting to leave
Authorities
the
had
country.
seized
Assets continued
3.4
to
tons
fall.
of narcotics.
Just
The freeze
money.
orders expanded.
ask yourself
More
this.
than $480
6
million
US
in
states.
accounts, property,
gradually
and
becoming the
vehicles were
norm
frozen
and
or
justified
seized.
with
Luxury
practical
homes in Bel Air
excuses,
and Beverly
mitigation
Hills.
that would
Warehouses
Noor
in
was
Commerce and
41
Long
years old.
Beach. Shell companies registered
first-term
under
Ohio
transportation
State senator.
services, logistics
Again
firms,
and again.
consulting agencies.
Until it
all
was
of it
no
connected,
longer possible
all of it
to
dismantled.
Dismantled a
Inside federal
multi-state
court,
trafficking ring
judges were
and
blunt.
taken
Bail denied.
142 suspects
Passports
into
surrendered.
custody.
only when there is no
Demanded
longer
into
room
custody.
for costly
Several
side.
were transferred to high-security detention facilities, normally reserved for major organized crime
The
figures.
sealed loading
The
docks
message
and
was
steel
clear.
gates of the West.
This wasn't white-collar crime.
Those inside
This was
were forced to the
organized
ground,
narcotics
hands
trafficking.
kept visible.
This was the
Analysts were still
infrastructure
tracing
of the
Medicaid
Vasquez
payments and
cartel
nonprofit
operating
links. The
inside
numbers
American
told a
territory.
completely
And
different
federal
story.
authorities
For the
would
first
respond
time
with
in many
maximum
years,
force.
the system
Behind the
started
scenes,
cleansing itself
sentencing
from the inside
negotiations
out.
accelerated.
Helicopters
Prosecutors made
disappeared
one
from the
thing
night
clear to
sky.
defense attorneys.
Security investigations
Cooperation meant
and the
decades.
DEA.
Silence
What
meant
remained
life.
was
By week 2,
accountability.
5 defendants
Slowly,
had formally
methodically,
agreed to
and without
cooperate.
mercy.
Their statements expanded
The
the
same
scope even
category
further.
used for
The
industrial
taxis weren't
substances.
just a
Cartel
distribution
distribution
tool.
hub.
They were
Faded
a firewall.
first.
Using
Alarm
a legitimate
sirens became less
transportation
frequent.
service insulated the
Legal
operation from scrutiny.
and encrypted
Police
storage
avoided
drives.
taxis.
Before
Security
locating
cameras
a-
deprioritized.
What started as an immigration
Traffic
sweep
stops were rare.
Concealed safe
No one
hidden
questioned
behind
a cab
interior
pulling
panel.
over anywhere,
The second team
anytime,
entered
day
North
or
Star
night.
Community
That
Health
protection
in a
was gone
low-income
now.
neighborhood.
Meanwhile,
In that
the
moment, the
8.2
agents
tons of
realized
seized
the city was
narcotics were being
facing a
processed
major
as
crime
evidence
because the
scheduled for
distribution
destruction
networks
under federal
themselves had
supervision.
collapsed.
The cocaine
The
was weighed,
Store and
cataloged,
transport a massive
documented with
logistical
photographs
center.
for trial evidence.
Pause and reflect
Then
right
crushed
now and
under
ask
federal
yourself
supervision
whether
and
this is only the
incinerated.
beginning.
The
Additional
methamphetamine
teams
followed.
entered
The fentanyl
nonprofit
pills were
satellite
photographed
offices
individually.
listed as
Some
Some
pressed
believe
to
that
look
this
like
hotel
legitimate
raid
pharmaceuticals.
exposed far
Others
more than
stamped
just
with cartel
immigration
symbols and then
violations.
destroyed.
Undercover
8.2
buys,
tons
digital
removed from
tracing, and
circulation
multi-agency
permanently.
intelligence
No rerouting.
gathering.
And
No
criminals.
recovery. No
However,
black
the
market
human
sale.
cost was staggering.
Desks were
Across the
neatly
region,
arranged but
supply
untouched.
chains fractured
Printers
immediately.
were warm
Prices
despite
spiked.
Tens of thousands of lives destroyed and thousands of families shattered.
Dealers who had relied on the taxi empire's consistency discovered that the infrastructure had vanished overnight.
The phones seized from the rooms kept vibrating nonstop. Scandal involving Khalif and Hodan
because the system had been dismantled with such precision that the architecture itself was now evidence. And for the first
the cartel
time,
had been
traffickers
using the
realized
facility
something terrifying.
with a spotless
Blending in
public
with
service
everyday
record.
Life didn't make you invisible. It made you predictable. And predictability is what brought empires down. By the time sentencing began, the taxi empire was finished. The court proceedings moved fast, methodical, and final. Federal judges reviewed thousands of pages of evidence. Dispatch logs, GPS overlays, financial ledgers, compartment schematics, sworn testimony from cooperating defendants. The sentences were not symbolic. They were permanent. Victor Reyes, the man who controlled dispatch, vehicle rotation, and routing logic, the operational architect of the entire network, received life in federal prison without parole. No reduction. No appeal window that mattered. 3 senior executives followed. 40 years. 38 years. 35 years. Each sentence stacked with mandatory minimums tied to continuing criminal enterprise statutes. Fleet engineers who designed and installed the hidden compartments were sentenced to 25 to 30 years. Financial controllers who laundered proceeds through transportation accounts received similar lengths. In total, 22 defendants were sentenced to federal prison terms exceeding 20 years. No one walked free. The federal court ordered immediate forfeiture of all assets tied to the operation. The 500 vehicles were transferred to federal custody. None were resold. None were returned to service. They were destroyed, crushed, dismantled, rendered unusable. Each vehicle stripped of its hidden compartments, documented, and then scrapped. The message was unmistakable. These taxis would never move anything again. The dispatch centers were shut down permanently. Their licenses revoked. Their buildings seized. The servers were wiped and cataloged as evidence. As for the $480 million, it vanished as completely as the narcotics. Accounts frozen. Properties seized. Shell companies dissolved. Every dollar traced back to the operation was removed from circulation. And with that, the taxi empire ceased to exist. Not rebranded. Not rebuilt. Ended. Los Angeles traffic returned to normal within days. But something fundamental had changed. Taxi fleets were audited immediately. Transportation companies throughout the state were scrutinized. New regulations were quietly rolled out that required deeper inspection of vehicles previously considered low risk. What once blended into the background was now under a microscope. Inside criminal circles, the fallout was immediate and severe. Networks that had relied on taxis as cover abandoned the method entirely. Routes dissolved. Partnerships collapsed. Suppliers went dark. The lesson was brutal and unmistakable. Using everyday systems doesn't protect you. It exposes you. The people who believed they were untouchable were now counting time in federal cells. The vehicles they relied on were scrap metal. The money they moved was gone. In the months that followed, the operation became more than a headline. It became a manual. Federal agencies circulated internal briefings outlining exactly how the taxi empire worked, how it blended into traffic patterns, how it exploited public trust, how it used legitimate transportation rules as camouflage. Transportation regulators rewrote oversight standards. Random inspections expanded. Data sharing agreements between cities went live. Dispatch systems that once operated with minimal scrutiny were now required to maintain audit trails that couldn't be erased or rerouted. What used to be ignored became measurable. What used to be invisible became documented. And across the country, similar networks didn't wait to be discovered. They shut themselves down. Fleet owners dissolved companies overnight. Vehicles were sold off in bulk. Dispatch offices went dark without explanation. The taxi empire had sent a message no one wanted to test. As for the people at the center of it, their futures were already decided. Court records show the first transfers to long-term federal facilities completed within weeks. High-security units. Restricted movement. No contact except through monitored channels. The kind of incarceration reserved for organized systems, not individuals. There would be no comeback, no rebrand, no quiet return under a different name. The vehicles were gone. The money was gone. The leadership was gone. 8.2 tons of narcotics never reached the streets. 500 vehicles were permanently removed from circulation. $480 million evaporated from the criminal economy. And something else disappeared with it. Confidence. Because the most damaging outcome wasn't the seizure. It was the realization that a system built to look ordinary had been understood, mapped, and dismantled without a single warning shot. No dramatic chase. No shootout. Just precision. The city moved on as cities always do. Traffic returned. Taxis kept rolling. Most people never knew how close they had been to riding alongside a moving distribution network every single day. And that's exactly why the case mattered. It proved that scale doesn't protect you. Routine doesn't protect you. Normal doesn't protect you. This story is a fictional dramatization created for educational and storytelling purposes only. The characters, officials, cartel names, and specific details have been invented to illustrate how federal law enforcement dismantles organized criminal infrastructure. If you found this investigation compelling, share it. Because the systems that hide in plain sight are the ones that hurt the most.